Hi everyone, I'm Sarah Black. I'm FIGT Social Media Manager. I'm here with Jodi Harris, who is our brand new Vice President. So that's very exciting. That's not the reason that Jodi's with me today. So I'm going to let her introduce herself and explain a little bit more about why she's here.
Yeah. Hi, Sarah. Thank you so much for having me. I am here today as an FIGT member to talk about the importance of mindfulness in our globally mobile lives and what mindfulness is and why how we can use the skills of mindfulness to better access our inner sense of home as we go from place to place.
Fantastic. I could certainly do some of that today, Jodi. So can you start by explaining for people who don't know what mindfulness is? We hear a lot of it. Yeah. We hear it being talked about a lot, but I'm not sure any of us really understand exactly what.
Right. Yeah, it's super interesting, I think, to think about like just the basics of what is mindfulness, because I remember when I first started learning these concepts around almost 15 years ago, it felt like nobody was really obviously people were talking about it, but it was still kind of not in the mainstream. Yeah. But now you see it everywhere. And I kind of joke with people like the idea of like hashtag mindfulness, and it's like someone in Bali, and nothing wrong with Bali, but the curtains are blowing and stuff. And yes. I think for most of us, that's not really what mindfulness looks like in our everyday lives. So I like to say I'm more of the like, crap, I spilled my coffee and my kids are late for school and I have a stain on my shirt sort of mindfulness experience. But mindfulness, like kind of the basic definition of mindfulness, is non-judgmental in the moment awareness. And it's our ability to pay attention to what's happening as it's happening. And I like to remind people that when we say non-judgmental, we don't mean that we become like, oh, everything is perfect and life is always awesome, but that we learn to engage with what's happening in such a way that we move away from the idea of labeling everything as good or bad. And we see things as more as they are, so that we then have greater choice for how we want to engage with those things that are happening in our life, whether it's our emotions or our thoughts or our relationships or anything that's coming up for us.
Awesome. So if anybody at home is watching this, our theme for this kind of next couple of weeks is dealing with those times in expat life that are really, really difficult, where being an expat just puts another, or globally mobile puts another layer on what would be a challenging situation for perhaps anybody. How can mindfulness help us in those times, and what does it look like in practice? How do people begin to start a mindfulness practice if they're looking at you going, that sounds awesome, Jodi, I have no idea what to do next.
Right. So let me start by just kind of maybe touching on some of the things that I hear people often say, awesome. Because that might be helpful. So sometimes I hear people say like, oh my gosh, like I'm so scattered, I could never do that. But the truth is that we're actually born with the skills we need to practice mindfulness. That doesn't mean that we're all always super calm or zened out or happy. But what it does mean is that inside us, we carry the ability to pay attention to our experience. And if you think about it, we're born with those skills. If you look at an infant or a toddler, everything is like, ooh, and amazing, whether it's their own hands or their own, they're like making raspberries with their mouth or whatever, they pay attention, and it's this kind of natural inclination. And so sometimes I hear people say like, oh, it just seems too hard, but I like to remind people that it's actually inherent in you. For most of us, we just get away from it in our lives because there's so many distractions. I also like to remind people, at least from my perspective, most people have heard of mindfulness meditation, which is, or Vipassana meditation, which is the ability, where you're sitting and you're paying attention to your breath as it goes in and out. And that's a really amazing practice. I practice meditation in my own life. It's incredibly helpful. But sometimes people get a little freaked out when they hear mindfulness because they think, oh, I'm going to have to sit on a cushion and meditate. And that just doesn't seem like something I would ever do, right?
Yeah.
And I especially for expats, I always want to say like, no, you you don't have to. Like, you can learn so much from the practice of mindfulness meditation. Anyone can do it. You can take a class, you can learn in your own community. But if you feel that the only way to learn to be mindful is to practice mindfulness meditation, you're missing so much more of the way that you can apply it to your daily life. So there are all sorts of ways that we can use the practice, and I can talk about this more in a minute, but to engage with some of the stressors that come up.
Okay.
And so anyone can do it. It doesn't have to just be meditation. Kind of looking at some notes I made for myself, things I wanted to remind everyone. And sometimes I hear people say like, oh, but it's just about being super like, what's the word? Just like zenned out is the thing people always say. Like,
yes.
Like, oh. And then sometimes people are kind of, you even read this in the media, like kind of aggressive towards that. Like, oh, who would want to be mindful, right? Because then you don't care about things. It's just not the case. If you really study mindfulness and learn about mindfulness, it's not about not caring. It's not about not feeling. It's learning to be present with whatever is coming up. And so there's a really famous American mindfulness teacher, Jon Kabat-Zinn, and he says, you can't avoid, I'm going to misquote him, but it's the gist of it is you can't avoid the storm, but you can learn to ride the waves.
Yeah.
And so it's not about moving away from those experiences, but rather how we step into them.
Okay.
And I think for the expat experience, that's especially important because, maybe 90% of our life experience is, pretty similar to anyone else's, but that remaining 10% that is so unique to the globally mobile community can, if you're not tuning into that, can really make you feel like you've completely lost your bearings.
Yeah.
And that's where we benefit from learning some practical, accessible mindfulness skills that we can use that go with us no matter where we go. That it's not like, oh, I was meditating for 30 minutes a day and now I moved somewhere else and I have a different schedule and now I can't be mindful anymore because I can't do my meditation.
Yes.
Yeah.
So it's more like a kind of an ongoing state of mind almost. If that's an accurate way of describing it or not. But it does see, one of the things I know you've written about is how it can help you feel at home when you're in a strange place.
Yeah.
And I want to ask you more about that because I know that most of us at some point struggle with that, whether you've repatriated and you go, this doesn't feel like home.
Right.
Or you're in, like, I know you've just moved to Brussels from Japan, so it probably all still feels very new.
Right.
How can those mindfulness skills help us with that kind of discombobulation of
right.
feeling that you're quite where you're meant to be?
Right. One of the things that's inherent in the practice of mindfulness is, lots of things are inherent in it, but one thing I think that really ties into that is the concept of self-compassion, and that we can learn to be accepting of whatever we're experiencing. And I'm really careful with the word accepting because I don't mean like if something bad happens to you that you're just like, oh, it doesn't matter, because it's not about that, but it's about learning to accept things as they are. So, and to work from that framework. Right?
Yeah.
So for example, let's say you arrive somewhere and this happens, that you arrive and you just are like, I hate this place. Like you just, and I'm fortunate that I don't think I've lived anywhere where I thought, I just hate this place. But you hear this, right? That people are like, this place did not suit me from day one.
Yeah.
It's not that practicing mindfulness is going to cause you to suddenly feel, oh, actually, this place is awesome, and I just didn't notice it. Oh, then maybe that would happen. But what a mindfulness practice can do is help you observe what you're thinking about the place, what you're feeling emotionally about the place, and what's coming up for you physically about the place. Okay. And when you open yourself up to observe those things, whether it's simply by taking a pause or going for a walk and just kind of reflecting on that, or journaling, or practicing meditation, whatever it is you choose to do to allow yourself to observe what's happening, when you put yourself in that state of kind of curious observation, what's happening here, what am I seeing, then you get more information.
Yeah.
And more information helps you choose how you want to respond, especially when you're feeling homeless and out of sorts.
Yeah, and I think I've seen you quoted as saying that you can't avoid the stress, but you can choose who you want to be in that moment of stress, and that mindfulness helps with that, with kind of figuring out, oh, wait a minute, I'm actually really angry, and that's not helpful. So can I change that, or do I have to accept that and then find ways of getting help to work through that, or whatever it happens to be? But at least you kind of realize that angry is what you're doing.
Right. Yeah. And a big part of the practice of mindfulness, if you're practicing mindfulness meditation, sometimes people liken this to kind of like watching clouds go by, and you're just kind of naming the things that are happening. So, whether it's like my foot's itching, or I'm feeling hungry, or I'm worrying, you're naming those things. And you can do that as a mindfulness practice in your everyday life. Yeah. So being able to name anger. I'm feeling angry, and it's because this got messed up, and this happened, and this happened, and that happened. And there's so much power they say, there's a researcher, Dan Siegel, who said he works a lot with kids in mindfulness, and he says, name it to tame it. Like, once you name that, and think about, even just in me saying that, think about how that is, everyone knows that, right? Everyone, but like in general, we know that, right? If you talk about what's happening, if you notice what's happening, you free yourself to kind of say, okay, now what? And that goes back to the idea that we all have these skills, and mindfulness is about combining our attention with our intention and putting those things together.
So if I'm listening to this at home and want to kind of start taking a more mindful approach, any practical tips that you would give somebody who's going, okay, this sounds interesting, this makes sense to me, Jodi, where do I start?
Right. I think one of the most important things we can do is simply begin the practice of this naming that I mentioned. And we can do that really simply by first allowing ourselves to pause in the moment. And I'll give an example. So just the other day, just a couple days ago, I was working with my son who's in 6th grade on his homework, and he was like distracted, and he was doing lots of different things. And I was like, okay, put your hands here and just take a breath. And just take a breath, and you feel immediately this kind of clarity, like, okay, everything starts to settle. And then you can see like, oh, I'm distracted, or, oh, this is, I feel whatever it is. And then that only takes a few seconds, but taking that pause, 1 breath or 2 breaths, is one of the most simplest things you can do to begin creating a regular mindfulness practice. So you had mentioned like, oh, it's kind of a state of mind. It is a state of mind, but I think more than that, it's acknowledging that mindfulness is a practice that you do a little bit each day. And the more you do, the more natural it becomes. So simply pausing to take a breath is a really great, very basic thing that anyone can do. I think the other thing, and this kind of goes back to what I was saying before, is the practice of choosing a specific thing to notice. So you might ask yourself the question, what am I assuming here? And simply by allowing yourself to observe mindfully the assumptions, then you see that. Where before, maybe if you're like having an argument with your partner because, who packed this or who packed that or whatever, which I mean, these are like the same, every expat family has like the same arguments, right? And you say, what am I assuming? Then it just creates that space. And then a lot of mindfulness is creating the space between that moment when you notice something and how you respond. So asking questions like, what am I assuming, or what am I thinking? Another thing that is really helpful is the practice of simply naming your emotions and being able to say, sadness or anger or happiness or anticipation or anxiety coupled with sadness, coupled with anticipation, which is, maybe it's all of those things, right, all together. And then I would say finally, the practice of observing your physical sensations. So something that people often find helpful is to do what's called a body scan meditation. And anyone watching can just Google that, like body scan meditation, and you'll get tons that come up either on YouTube or just on Google, or, you can find them everywhere. And that's just noticing, starting with your toes, noticing your body all the way up. Because one of the things that happens, I think, is we're moving and all these things are happening, and we push so much down. We're like, I'm fine, everything's fine, but it shows up in our bodies. And so all of these are really things, good point. Yeah, and all of these are things that one might do in mindfulness meditation. You can also simply do them throughout the day. As you sit down at your computer to start the day, or right before you go to bed, or even in a few seconds before you pick the kids up from school or start dinner, or whatever it is you have going on each day, taking those little breaks to do those mini mindfulness activities, help. Your brain is a muscle, and the more you practice, it's like doing push-ups. The more you do it, the more it becomes natural.
Awesome. Any other particular tips or any other issues where you feel mindfulness is particularly useful for expats? Because sometimes it can all get a bit crazy, and I think you've spoken about that really well, but just anything else that you wanted to offer people?
Yeah, I think that the main thing is just we sometimes think that home is like this outside place that we're searching for, but it actually is what we carry inside us. And when we remember that, when we hold that as our belief, then we know that if we can be present in the moment, even during really crappy, difficult times, that we have what we need, if we observe what's there. And even observing what's there can help you if you need extra help. If you need to see a therapist, you need to go to a doctor, you need to talk to a friend, that observation, that mindful observation serves you in helping yourself, but also in getting help you need from others.
Yeah, no, that's really valuable, actually. And in one of our dual careers interviews, I think Daniela Tomer talks about the importance of getting that help.
Yeah.
As soon as you realize there's a problem, that it's okay to get that help, and not to leave it till you've really got yourself into a bad situation, mentally or psychological.
Yeah, for sure.
Jodi, awesome. I recommend, if you want to know more, check out Jodi's blog, because she's got some great content there and some really helpful stuff about gratitude and home, and learning more about what mindfulness practice is, and some really great practical tips. Jodi, thank you very much. I hope everybody has gained a little insight into some ways to cope better with the challenges and the tough stuff that comes with being globally mobile.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Sarah.
Thank you, Jodi. Bye.
Bye.